Imagine losing everything in the blink of an eye. Your freedom, your future, your very identity, all stripped away for a crime you didn't commit. This is the story of a woman who was cast into the darkest pit of the justice system, only to find the one person she never expected to see again holding the keys to her cage. It's a tale of unthinkable betrayal, a desperate fight for the truth, and the love that was shattered, but perhaps not entirely lost. Prepare yourself, because once this story begins, there is no turning back. Just 4 years ago, Ava Mitchell's life was a symphony. A gifted classical pianist, she poured her passion into music. Then she met Ethan Cole, a sharp, dedicated law student, with a kind heart and a future as bright as his smile. They fell in love, planned a wedding, and their future seemed set. But then Mark Thompson walked into her life, a charismatic entrepreneur with a magnetic personality and a portfolio of upscale restaurants. He swept Ava off her feet, and in a whirlwind of confusion and passion, she made a choice that would alter the course of her life forever. She broke Ethan's heart, called off the wedding, and married Mark. He made her a partner, putting 3 of his 6 restaurants in her name. It felt like a dream, until a business dinner with a partner, Julian Croft, turned into a nightmare. Croft was poisoned, and a vial with Ava's fingerprints was found in her car. The dream shattered, and she was convicted of attempted murder. The clang of the steel door was the sound of a period at the end of a life. It echoed in the small concrete cell, a final, metallic punctuation mark. The air was thick and stale, smelling of industrial-grade disinfectant, sweat, and something deeper, like hopelessness. Ava Mitchell stood frozen, her civilian clothes feeling alien and flimsy in this new world of drab grey jumpsuits. A mountain of a woman with a cruel smile and the name Queenie tattooed on her knuckles blocked her path. Queenie's eyes, small and hard like pebbles, raked over Ava's trembling form. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, her sheer size eclipsing the weak light from the single-barred window. The low hum of the prison faded into the background, replaced by the pounding of Ava's own heart. This was it. This was her new reality, and its gatekeeper was a woman who looked like she chewed on nightmares for breakfast. Well, well, look what the cat dragged in. Queenie's voice was a low growl, rumbling from deep in her chest. What's your name, princess? And what did you do to earn a stay at this fine establishment? Ava's throat was tight, the words trapped behind a wall of fear. Before she could answer, a wiry woman with a jagged scar down her cheek, a woman they called Roxy, snatched the small mesh bag of personal effects from Ava's hand. She dumped the contents onto a stained cot. A toothbrush, a tube of toothpaste, a comb. Roxy snorted in disgust. Nothing, this one's got nothing. Queenie's smile widened, showing a row of yellowed teeth. Oh, she's got something, Roxy. She's got our attention. The unspoken threat hung in the air, heavier and more suffocating than the cell's foul stench. Ava felt 100 pairs of unseen eyes on her, judging, waiting for her to break. They pointed her to an empty top bunk. Climbing the cold metal ladder felt like ascending a gallows. Ava lay stiffly on the thin, lumpy mattress, pulling the scratchy wool blanket up to her chin. The lights went out with a loud buzz, plunging the cell into a disorienting darkness pierced only by slivers of moonlight. The night came alive with a symphony of suffering, a woman sobbing softly in a nearby bunk, another muttering in her sleep, the rhythmic creak of bed springs. Ava clamped her hand over her mouth, determined not to add her own tears to the chorus of despair. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. As her eyes adjusted, she looked down and saw a face looking up at her from the bunk below. It was a young woman, maybe her age, with kind eyes. The woman gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, a tiny beacon of humanity in an ocean of hostility. It wasn't much, but for now, it was everything. In the suffocating darkness, the day's events replayed in her mind like a horror film. The judge's gavel falling, a sound as final as the cell door. The look on Mark's face in the courtroom, a perfect mask of anguish and disbelief, a performance that had completely fooled her. But the sharpest memory, the one that still sent a jolt of ice through her veins, was from the intake processing. As she was being fingerprinted, her world already spinning, she'd looked up and met the eyes of a corrections officer standing across the room. Ethan Cole. Her Ethan. 4 years had passed, but she would know that face anywhere. He was leaner, harder, the easy smile she loved replaced by a grim, unreadable expression. For a split second their eyes locked. There was no recognition, no shock, just a cold, professional indifference. But she saw it. She knew he saw her. The man whose heart she had broken was now her jailer. A blaring alarm jolted her from a fitful sleep at precisely 6 a.m. The day began with a cacophony of shouting guards and shuffling feet. Breakfast was a grey, lumpy substance in a plastic bowl that was supposed to be oatmeal. It tasted of cardboard and defeat. Afterward, they were marched in a single file line through sterile corridors to the prison workshop. The room was vast and filled with the deafening drone of industrial sewing machines. The air smelled of hot machine oil and lint. Ava was assigned to a machine that looked like a medieval torture device. Its needle punched up and down with terrifying speed. She was handed a pile of denim fabric and a simple instruction: sew straight seams on prison uniforms. Her hands, which once danced over ivory piano keys, now fumbled with the coarse, unforgiving material. She was a musician in a factory, a dreamer in a cage. The needle jammed. The thread snapped. Ava's seams were crooked and bunched. A thick-necked guard named Officer Miller loomed over her, his face a permanent scowl. "Mitchell, you think this is a hobby class? You don't meet your quota, you don't eat. It's that simple." His voice boomed over the noise of the machines. Panic began to rise in Ava's chest. Just as tears started to well in her eyes, a hand reached over and expertly rethreaded the machine. It was the woman from the bunk below, Chloe. "Keep your foot steady," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the din. "Don't fight the machine, guide it. You'll get the hang of it." She offered a quick, reassuring smile before moving back to her own station. It was another small act of grace, a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Ava took a deep breath, placed her foot back on the pedal, and tried again. Yard time was a cruel joke. It wasn't a yard. It was a concrete box, open to a patch of indifferent grey sky, surrounded by walls topped with razor wire. Inmates walked in endless, joyless circles. Ava found Chloe leaning against a wall, away from the main groups. "Thanks for this morning," Ava said, her voice quiet. "Don't mention it." "The first week is the worst," Chloe replied, her eyes scanning the yard. "You learn who to avoid, who to watch. You learn to make yourself small." They stood in silence for a moment before Chloe spoke again. "I'm in for Grand Theft Auto. Took the fall for my boyfriend. He said he'd wait for me." She gave a bitter laugh. "I haven't heard from him in 6 months. Love makes you do stupid things." The words hung in the air, a sentiment Ava understood all too well. She had also done a stupid thing for what she thought was love. Emboldened by Chloe's confession, Ava found herself sharing her own story. She spoke in hushed tones, the words feeling unreal as she said them aloud. "They say I tried to kill my husband's business partner, Julian Croft, that I poisoned him at a dinner I hosted." She described the chaos of that night, the ambulance, the police. "They found a vial of the drug in my car. My fingerprints were all over it. I have no idea how it got there." She looked at Chloe, her eyes pleading for belief. "I didn't do it. Someone set me up." Chloe listened, her expression serious. "In here," she said softly, "almost everyone is innocent. The difference is, I look at you and I actually believe it. The question is, who would want to frame you so perfectly?" Ava had been asking herself the same question every single day. The tension in the mess hall was a physical thing, thick enough to be cut with a plastic knife. As Ava sat down with her tray of bland pasta, Queenie and Roxy loomed over her table. "The princess needs to pay a tax," Queenie grunted, reaching for Ava's bread roll. "And your jello." Before Ava could react, Chloe slid onto the bench beside her. "Leave her alone, Queenie." Chloe's voice was calm, but her eyes were like steel. Queenie straightened up, surprised by the challenge. For a long moment the two women stared each other down. The entire mess hall seemed to hold its breath. Finally, with a dismissive sneer, Queenie backed away. "This ain't over, newbie," she snarled at Ava. "Not by a long shot." As she walked away, Chloe leaned in. "You just made an enemy," she whispered. "But you also showed you have a friend. In here, that's worth more than a bread roll." Visitation day felt like a trip to another planet. Sitting in a room filled with crying children and strained conversations, Ava waited. Then she saw her, Jessica Vance, her best friend, the woman she trusted to manage her restaurants while she was away. Jessica looked uncomfortable, her designer handbag clutched in her lap like a shield. "Oh, Ava, honey," she said, her voice full of forced sympathy. "This is just awful. Mark is a complete wreck, you know. He's doing everything he can, talking to the best lawyers." She pushed a bag of cheap commissary snacks across the table. The gesture felt hollow, insulting. Ava studied her friend's face, searching for the genuine warmth that used to be there, but all she found was a strange, nervous energy. A tiny seed of doubt, cold and sharp, began to sprout in the back of her mind. The showers were a place of vulnerability, a concrete room filled with steam, and the constant threat of violence. Ava tried to be quick, to keep her back to the wall, but she wasn't quick enough. Queenie and Roxy cornered her near the back, away from the entrance. The steam swirled around them, muffling any sound. "You think you're special, don't you?" Queenie hissed, her face inches from Ava's. "Think your little friend can protect you everywhere?" Roxy blocked the only exit, a cruel smirk on her face. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped Ava. There were no guards, no Chloe, no one to help. It was just her and the two women who had decided to make her life a living hell. The tiled walls seemed to close in, and the sound of dripping water was like a clock ticking down to her own destruction. The first punch came without warning, a hard fist to her stomach that knocked the wind out of her. Ava gasped, doubling over. Queenie grabbed her by the hair, slamming her head against the tiled wall. Stars exploded behind her eyes. Another blow, then another. She fell to the wet floor, her body coiling into a defensive ball. A foot connected with her ribs, sharp and brutal. Through the pain and the ringing in her ears, Ava's mind retreated. It flew out of the cold, violent shower room to a warm, sunlit conservatory. She was a child again, her fingers dancing across the keys of a grand piano, filling the air with a beautiful soaring melody by Chopin. It was her last conscious thought before the world dissolved into blackness. She woke to the smell of antiseptic and the soft, rhythmic beep of a machine. Her head throbbed with a pain so intense it made her nauseous. A kind face with tired eyes hovered over her. "Welcome back," the man said gently. His name tag read, Dr. Sam Carter. "You're in the infirmary. You have a severe concussion and a few cracked ribs. You're lucky. It could have been much worse." Ava tried to speak, but only a dry croak came out. He held a cup with a straw to her lips. The cool water was a blessing. "Don't try to talk," he said. "Just rest. You're safe here." Safe. It was a word she hadn't felt in what seemed like a lifetime. For the first time since the steel door had slammed shut, a wave of profound, exhausted relief washed over her, and she let the darkness claim her again. The next day she had another visitor. This one was not so kind. Warden Diane Harding stood at the foot of her bed, a clipboard in her hand, her expression one of pure annoyance. "What a mess," she said, not to Ava, but to Dr. Carter, who stood beside her. "Fights in the showers. The paperwork is a nightmare." She glanced at Ava with cold, dismissive eyes. "Don't waste my resources on her, Carter. These inmates are tougher than they look. Patch her up and get her back to the general population. We're not running a hotel here." The warden's voice was clipped and devoid of any compassion. She saw Ava not as a person, a victim, but as a problem, an inconvenience that was disrupting the orderly routine of her prison. Ava felt a chill that had nothing to do with her injuries. This woman held her life in her hands, and she didn't care at all. Late that night, when the infirmary was quiet, another figure appeared in her doorway. It was Ethan. He was out of uniform, and he looked exhausted. The air between them crackled with 4 years of unspoken words of hurt and betrayal. He pulled a chair close to her bed. "Ava," he started, his voice low and strained. "I saw you the day you came in. I didn't know what to say." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered so well. "I've been looking into your case file, reading the trial transcripts." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers, and the next words he spoke sent a shockwave through her. "I know you didn't do it. It doesn't make any sense. It's not who you are." After months of being told she was a criminal, hearing those words from him was like a crack of light in an endless cavern of darkness. Ethan's face grew grim. "There's more," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Yesterday I was outside the warden's office. She was on the phone. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard her say your name. She was talking to a woman. The woman was angry you were still alive. She offered Harding more money to finish the job, to make it look like an accident, a slip in the shower, a fight that goes too far." Ava's blood ran cold. It wasn't just a random prison beating. Someone on the outside wanted her dead. Someone had paid the warden to make it happen. Did you hear who it was?" Ava whispered, her heart pounding. Ethan shook his head. "No." The voice was distorted, and Harding kept her back to me. "But Ava, this changes everything. They're not just trying to keep you in here. They're trying to kill you." I'm going to get you out of here," Ethan said, his voice filled with a fierce determination she hadn't heard in years. He looked like the law student she'd fallen in love with again, the one who fought for justice. "I have a plan. It's insane and it's dangerous, but it's the only shot we have." He explained the outlines of a desperate scheme involving Dr. Carter and a transport van. "It will mean becoming a fugitive. You'll be on the run. But it's better than being a target in a cage." He looked at her, his expression a mixture of guilt and resolve. "I should have done something sooner. I let my anger, my pride, get in the way." He reached out and his hand gently covered hers. "I let you go once, Ava. I'm not going to do it again. But you have to trust me." Looking into the eyes of the man she had so carelessly betrayed, Ava knew she had no other choice. She nodded. Returning to her cell block was like walking back into a lion's den. But something was different. The story of her beating had spread, and so had the fact that she hadn't snitched. In the twisted culture of the prison, silence was strength. When Ava walked past Queenie in the chow line, the big woman didn't meet her eyes. Roxy actually shuffled out of her way. They didn't know who had her back, but they knew someone powerful enough had gotten her sent to the infirmary, and that she had kept her mouth shut. The attack, meant to break her, had inadvertently given her a strange, new kind of status. She was no longer just the princess. She was a survivor. They still watched her, but now it was with a wary, grudging respect. The immediate threat had subsided, but Ava knew the real danger was still out there, waiting. The day of Chloe's release was bittersweet. They stood in the yard for the last time, the bleak concrete walls surrounding them. "You find the truth, Ava," Chloe said, giving her a fierce hug. "Don't let those bastards win. You get your life back." Ava held on tight. "Be safe out there, Chloe." As they pulled away, Ava pressed a tiny folded piece of paper into her friend's hand. On it was a phone number. "There's no name," Ava whispered, following the instructions Ethan had given her. "Just call the number. Say the piano is out of tune. He'll know what it means." Chloe nodded, her eyes serious, and took the paper away. A guard called her name, and just like that, her only friend in this hell was gone. Walking out the gate and back into a world Ava wasn't sure she would ever see again. The plan went into motion 2 days later. In the middle of the workshop's chaotic noise, Ava let out a sharp cry and collapsed, clutching her side. She writhed on the floor, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Inmates gathered around as Officer Miller barked for them to get back. Dr. Carter was summoned. He did a quick examination, his face a mask of professional concern. "It looks like acute appendicitis," he announced to Miller, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "If we don't get her to a hospital, Her appendix could rupture. She could die. Miller, faced with the possibility of an inmate dying on his shift, cursed and immediately got on the radio to request an emergency transport. The first piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Ava, feigning agony, was carried on a stretcher back to the infirmary to await the van. Warden Harding arrived at the infirmary, her face a storm cloud of suspicion. "Appendicitis? How convenient," she sneered at Dr. Carter. "I can't risk it, Warden," Sam replied calmly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Her white blood cell count is elevated. She has a fever, and all the symptoms line up. If she dies of peritonitis on your watch because you denied her medical care, the internal investigation will be brutal. It's your call." He had bluffed perfectly. Harding stared at Ava, who let out a pained moan for effect. The warden was trapped. An inmate dying of a preventable condition was a bureaucratic nightmare she didn't want. "Fine," she snapped. "Get her out of here. And I want 2 guards on the transport, one of them cuffed to her stretcher." She stormed out. Ava let out a shaky breath. It was working. The transport van was stuffy and smelled of stale coffee. Ava was strapped to a gurney, a guard she didn't know cuffed to the railing. Ethan was in the driver's seat. As they pulled onto a deserted stretch of highway, Ethan began to curse loudly. Smoke started to pour from under the hood. He pulled over, yelling, "Engine fire! Everybody out!" The guard in the back panicked, fumbling for his keys to uncuff himself. In that moment of confusion, Ethan was at the back doors. He wasn't holding a fire extinguisher. He was holding a taser. He zapped the guard, who crumpled to the floor. He quickly unlocked Ava's cuffs, pulling her from the gurney. "Go! Now!" he yelled. They scrambled out of the van and sprinted into the dense woods that lined the highway, disappearing into the trees just as the fake smoke device Ethan had planted began to sputter and die. They ran until their lungs burned. Hours later, guided by a compass and a map Ethan had memorized, they reached a dilapidated cabin hidden deep in the state forest. It was a hunting cabin that belonged to an old family friend, a place no one would think to look. Inside it was dusty and cold, but it was safe. As Ethan lit a fire in the old wood stove, the reality of what they had done crashed down on Ava. She was a fugitive, a prison escapee. Her face would be on the news. "What now, Ethan?" she asked, her voice trembling. He looked at her, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "Now," he said, "we fight back. Now we find out who did this to you, and we make them pay." The fear was still there, but for the first time, it was mixed with something else, a fragile, flickering ember of hope. Ethan had not been idle in the weeks leading up to the escape. He had used his access to a legal database to do some digging. "Mark is in serious financial trouble," he told Ava, laying out a few printed documents on the dusty table. "He has massive gambling debts, and a couple of his restaurants are close to failing. He needed a big infusion of cash." Then he dropped the final bomb. "And I ran a background check on your friend Jessica Vance." He slid a photo across the table. It was a picture from a social media account showing Mark and Jessica on a boat, their arms around each other, looking far too comfortable to be just friends. The date stamp was from over a year ago. "They've been having an affair, Ava, all this time, and right now she's the one running your restaurants with full power of attorney." The betrayal was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. There was only one path forward. They had to expose the truth, but they needed undeniable proof. Ethan called the number Ava had given to Chloe. He spoke the code phrase, "The piano is out of tune." After a moment of silence, Chloe's voice came on the line, tense and cautious. Ethan quickly explained everything: the escape, the affair, the theory that Mark and Jessica had framed Ava. There was no hesitation in Chloe's response. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice firm. An hour later, Chloe was walking into one of Ava's old restaurants, the Gilded Spoon, to apply for a job as a waitress. She was their eyes and ears on the inside, a spy in the heart of the enemy's camp. The desperate, long-shot plan to reclaim Ava's life had begun. Chloe got the job. For the next week, she served expensive entrees and overpriced wine, all while keeping her eyes and ears open. She wore a tiny recording device, a favour from one of Ethan's old law school professors who specialised in defence work. She watched Mark and Jessica, saw how they spent lavishly on champagne while supplies went unpaid. She heard their hushed, angry arguments about money. They were careless, confident that Ava was locked away and would never be a threat again. They had no idea that the quiet new waitress, the one who was so good at refilling water glasses, was methodically documenting every detail of their crumbling empire and their guilty secrets. The breakthrough came late one Thursday night. Chloe was in the kitchen when Jessica stormed in, her face pale with panic, yelling into her phone. "What do you mean she's gone?" Jessica shrieked, her voice high and shrill. Chloe ducked behind a rack of supplies, the recorder running. "Harding said she would handle it. If Mitchell is out, she'll go straight to Julian Croft. He'll put it all together." There was a pause. "I don't care what it costs, Mark. You need to find her before she finds him." It was the smoking gun. The proof. Jessica hadn't just known about the framing. She was afraid Ava would expose a larger plot, a plot that involved Julian Croft. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. She had it. She had them. Listening to the recording, it all clicked into place. The motive was never just about getting rid of Ava. It was about Julian Croft. "The partnership agreement," Ava whispered, a look of dawning horror on her face. "If a partner is convicted of a felony, the contract is voided. The assets revert to the remaining partner." Mark hadn't just wanted to silence Croft. He wanted to steal his investment. The poisoning was meant to be fatal. When Croft survived, they needed a scapegoat to nullify the contract. And Ava, the trusting wife whose name was on all the documents, was the perfect choice. She hadn't just been framed for a crime. She had been used as a pawn in a multi-million-dollar corporate heist, orchestrated by her husband and her best friend. Armed with the recording, they made their riskiest move yet. Ethan arranged a clandestine meeting with Julian Croft. They played him the tape. Croft listened, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. He had always suspected Mark's finances were shaky, but he never imagined the depths of his and Jessica's treachery. "That woman, she served me the wine that night," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. The last piece of the puzzle fell into place. Jessica had been the one to administer the poison. "They tried to kill me and destroy my business, and they used you to do it," Croft said to Ava, his eyes filled with a new respect. "Well, they picked a fight with the wrong people. I have resources. I have lawyers. We are going to burn them to the ground." For the first time, they weren't just fugitives. They were a team. The end came swiftly. With the backing of Julian Croft's legal team and the evidence from Chloe's recording, the district attorney's office was forced to reopen the case. They set up a sting. Croft arranged a meeting with Mark and Jessica, pretending he was willing to make a deal to buy them out and make the whole thing go away. In a booked hotel conference room, feeling safe, they let their guard down. They talked openly about the plan, about Warden Harding's incompetence, about how they almost got away with it. When the police stormed the room, Jessica, in a desperate attempt to save herself, broke down completely. She confessed to everything, detailing Mark's financial crimes, her own role in the poisoning, and the bribe paid to Warden Harding. The entire corrupt enterprise collapsed like a house of cards. In the end, justice, though delayed, was served. Ava was fully exonerated, her name cleared. Mark, Jessica, and Warden Harding all received long prison sentences, destined to experience the same cold steel world they had tried to condemn Ava to forever. She had won her freedom, but the scars of betrayal and the chilling memory of those grey walls would remain a part of her story. Standing on the courthouse steps, a free woman, she looked at Ethan, the man who had risked everything for her and knew that some bonds, once broken, could actually be forged stronger in the fire. Ava finally had her life back, but she would never be the same. What would you do if the people you trusted most were the ones who set the trap? Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. If you were on the edge of your seat, hit that like button, subscribe for more unforgettable stories, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below.